The version of you that learned what success looks like didn't choose the lesson. They just absorbed it from whichever room they were already in. And that room is still deciding what counts as success in every room that you walk in to this day. I got the highest grade that you can possibly get in my apprenticeship. My first instinct wasn't to celebrate, it was to check my analytics because it still didn't feel like enough. My brain wasn't experiencing a win. It was treating my success like a virus. This is the immunology of success, the mechanism that makes you attack your own progress because your identity sees new territory and threat as the same thing. This is why a lot of people self-sabotage. You're still running a defense system that hasn't been updated in the last decade. So I got a distinction in my apprenticeship. I had been doing it alongside a full-time job. I was building my content businesses at the same time. I was finishing my business management degree at the same time. The distinction was the highest grade available. When the result came through the same evening, I had opened my phone and went straight to my content analytics. It wasn't to celebrate, it was because I wanted something bigger. My phone was open, I was looking at the numbers before I even thought about why I'd done that. And I realized what I had just done. I felt like a kind of embarrassment when you catch yourself doing something and you immediately realize what it means about you. It wasn't ambition. This is more like when you've been told you're on the right train, then when you've already got on it, you immediately are thinking if you should have got on the faster one. My achievement had come through. It passed through a filter that didn't recognize the success as safe. And it had decided before I even got a say that this wasn't success. The question that I hadn't asked until that night was what was the something that decided that my distinction wasn't good enough? Because it wasn't me. I hadn't sat down at any point in my life and decided what was good enough and what good enough actually meant. I had just woken up one day knowing what it was, or knowing that whatever I had wasn't it yet. And I'd never traced back, looked at where that knowing actually came from. The version of you that decides what counts, what progress is real, what success looks like, what you're actually allowed to feel good about, was built before you were even old enough to build it deliberately and intentionally yourself. It got assembled in the environment where you grew up. From specific things, what got praised in your house where you grew up versus what got ignored, what your school rewarded, what it dismissed, the first friendship group that you belonged to, and the unspoken rules that you had to absorb to get in or out of that group. The first person that you watched succeed, whatever they looked like when they did it. The first time that you realized that some kinds of achievements counted more than others. Your brain filed that understanding somewhere and it became your operating standard. There was no moment where you sat down with all of the options of what success looks like, what success could look like, and picked one. The environments that you were in while your identity was still forming. Your brain extracted what it needed from each of those rooms and called it yours. The specific problem is that it's still running. It didn't update when you left all of those environments, when you left school, when you left your house if you moved out, when you left a toxic work environment, when you left a toxic relationship. It didn't update when you got your dream job or you got the grade that you always wanted or you got the result. It didn't update when the circumstances that produced it in the first place stopped being relevant to your life. It just kept running the same program in every new context. This is why so many people live out the same patterns over and over and over. They think that it's bad luck, or there's bad people around them, or that they're just making the wrong decisions, when in reality their brain is still running the programs from all of these past environments in every new context that they find themselves in. When an achievement comes through, it passes through that identity first. Then your brain checks it against the standards that you have built in from those environments. If that standard that you built says that it's not the right kind of result, or that it came the wrong way, or that there's not enough of it, then the achievement doesn't land. You don't feel it. You move the goalpost forward. Maybe I'll feel something if I get even more money. Maybe I'll feel something if I'm even more free. I have even more time to myself. Maybe if I get an even higher grade, I'll be happy. So you move the goalpost, but moving the goalpost never fixes the feeling because you didn't build that goalpost. Something older did. I've noticed this most clearly in the gap between two different kinds of results in my own work. Something will happen to me that a year ago I'd have considered impossible. There's about 2 seconds where it registers as good. Then immediately this other layer, I start thinking about whether it's the right kind of good, whether it's actually meaningful, whether it's going to last, whether it counts the way the thing I actually want would count. None of that second layer of thinking is making a clear-eyed assessment. It's coming from something that was built when I had a completely different life, and I never stopped to ask myself whether that still applies. I like to summarize that this way. The version of you that decides what counts was built in a room you didn't choose, a room where praise was conditional, a room where enough was a moving target. That room is still the landlord of your current life. Most advice around this points at the behavior. Everyone says track your wins, practice gratitude, build discipline, set better goals, journal, meditate. These aren't wrong, but they all run from the surface, and the surface is not where the limits actually are. Limits are in the identity, and identity runs underneath behavior, which means you can change everything visible, habits, systems, goals, the standards that you set publicly. But if your identity is still running that old program from your toxic relationship, from your toxic household growing up, from abusive parents, from being bullied in school, every surface change will hit the same wall, because the wall isn't what you're doing, it's in what your identity is willing to let arrive. And this is exactly what I couldn't figure out for such a long time. I kept building better systems, my results were genuinely improving, but the feeling wasn't shifting at all. So I assumed that the system needed to be better. I would fix the system, and to some degree, a lot of problems that we have are because your system or your plan or however you're carrying out your path of how you intend to achieve your goals. Sometimes it's not the optimal path, and the feeling would improve slightly for around maybe like a week, and then it would settle back. I would end up fixing the system again. I probably ended up doing that for 2 years before I noticed the pattern. I kept getting a new method or seeing something on TikTok and being like, oh, this can work. Let me just tweak my plan, let me just change my schedule and let me try it. I just kept doing that over and over. The specific tell that this is happening to you is when the limit shows up in different areas at roughly the same level. It's not that one project keeps breaking in the same way, it's that the business thing and the creative thing and the fitness thing and the relationship thing all seem to hit similar resistance at a similar point. It can't logically be bad luck in multiple areas simultaneously. It's one source producing the same output in different directions. Because if the identity was built to survive a specific environment, it carries the logic of that environment into every new context. What felt safe to want? What level of visibility was okay? What kind of success was allowed for someone like you? What level of agency is allowed? What level of pushback is allowed? How you interpret other people's responses to you. That logic doesn't know that it's being transplanted. It just keeps doing its job. The people who don't have this, and they are genuinely rare, they're not more disciplined and they're not more talented. They are one of two things. They're either one, running an identity that was built in a different environment. Maybe they grew up in a healthy household. Maybe they had healthy friends. Maybe they had healthy inner self-talk. Or at some point, something forced them to look at the identity directly and update it intentionally and consciously. One of those is luck. One of those is something that you can actually do. So what I'm going to give you is not a mindset exercise. It's a specific set of questions that you can run tonight on any area where those limits keep showing up. It's the same 5 steps every single time. The area changes, but the questions don't. Step 1 is name it exactly. So don't just say, I feel behind. You feel behind in what? Compared to who? Write the actual thing down. This sounds extremely simple, but most people have just never done it. The specificness is what makes the source visible. Someone saying, I feel behind on where my career should be compared to my colleagues is completely different from, I feel behind because someone that I went to school with has a really good job and I don't. Both of those might feel the same from the inside, but only the second one tells you something about where that standard came from. Step 2 is to find out what enough looks like. You're going to ask the feeling directly, what would have to happen for this to stop? Not what you want. What does this specific feeling say would close the gap? Write that down. For most people, this is the moment the standard becomes visible for the first time because they've never looked at it directly. They've just felt the gap without ever asking themselves what is on the other side of it. Step 3 is to ask when the standard was set, not when you started feeling this way. When did that version of enough from step 2 become the measure for what success looks like? For most people, this will be between the ages of 12 and 22. Most of the time, it came from one of 3 places: family environment, school environment, or the first social group that mattered enough to shape what was acceptable to want, or any combination of the 3. Step 4, ask whose life that standard was created for. Not who made you feel it. It's usually not a single person, but which version of your life required this success measure. What was the context where this felt like it was the only path that was right for you? Because somewhere in your past, you came to a point in your life where this became the right reading, something that made sense for the conditions that it was working in. The question is whether those conditions still apply. And more often than not, the answer is no. Step 5 is to decide whether you choose it now. Not whether you agree with it intellectually, whether knowing what you know now about who you are, knowing what you're actually building, knowing the life that you're in today, would you set this as your standard from scratch today? If the honest answer is yes, then you've just confirmed it deliberately for the first time. And that's completely different from running it on default. If the answer is no, you found the thing that's been producing the limits in different areas of your life. And once you see it clearly enough to say no to it, it starts to have less authority over where it can land. And I'll be honest, I've run this specific set of questions on different areas of my life and it's worked really cleanly for me. There are other areas where I've run it in my life and I can see intellectually that the standard doesn't belong in my current life, but the feeling is still there. I'm not certain that just identifying it is always enough on its own. What I do know is that every time that I'm feeling it, it's usually because I haven't been specific enough in step 1 or 2. The vagueness is usually my brain protecting something that I haven't quite looked at yet. Those 5 steps work on career, money, relationships, work, any version of the feeling that you're not enough of something yet. The specific content of the feeling and where it came from is different every single time, but what's generating it is usually the same structure. You're not behind. You're being measured against a standard that was calibrated and created for a version of your life that probably does not exist anymore. Finding that standard, seeing it clearly enough to decide whether it still applies, is the thing that changes where it can show up. Not just changing what you do, looking at what's deciding what you're doing is worth. I have a free newsletter that goes through a specific reset process that works through all of this in much more depth. Link is in the description. I'll be releasing a paid newsletter soon that will have a reset prompt that you can use to reset your entire life. It's super detailed, it's coming out soon. The identity that you're living from has a timestamp on it. Not everything running underneath your behavior was set by you. The work isn't becoming someone different. It's finding out which parts of who you already are were chosen and which parts were created and never questioned. Thank you for watching. That's it from me. If you've run this audit already and your identity is lining up with who you actually want to be, it's chosen, deliberately confirmed it, and you are actually struggling with executing your goals consistently every single day, check out this video that I made. It helps you create systems that actually work, that actually hold, that don't break when you are super tired on a random Wednesday. That's it from me, and I'll see you in the next one.